Kazuo Ishiguro is perhaps best known for his novel Remains of the Day. His new book, When We Were Orphans, is his first in 5 years. It is the story of a celebrated English detective who during the height of the Sino-Japanese War returns to his birthplace in Shanghai. He is determined to solve the mystery of his parents' disappearance that left him orphaned when he was 9 years old. This novel is on the short list for the Booker Prize, Britain's top literary award, and I'm pleased to have Mr. Ishiguro here to talk about it. Welcome. Great to have
Thank you.
Good to see you again. Tell me why you wrote this and why this particular story.
It's a story about wanting to fix things that have been broken in childhood. Yeah. And it's a kind of theme, in one way or the other, that I've been playing around with for a while in my past work. Here it's told through a kind of a detective story. But, I mean, it's not a full-blown, detective story as such, but it pastiches and borrows from detective fiction. But essentially it's about wanting to go back to some moment in childhood when things went wrong and fix it.
Yeah. Now, why is that such a persistent theme with you?
Well, to some extent, I think, I don't want to necessarily suggest there's anything special about my own autobiography, although, yes, I did.
It is special to
well,
you.
Yes. I mean, it's true that I moved from Japan to England at an early age.
Right.
Maybe that's got something to do with it. The fact that I can readily identify my early childhood in a geographical space that I call Japan. I mean, a lot of people might not be able to do that quite so distinctly, but to some extent I'm trying to describe a universal experience. We must, all of us, even if we've grown up in the same place.
The effort to fix something.
Yeah, and the fact that we've lost a nicer world that we once knew when we were children. I imagine most of us may journey out of some nicer place. Adults tend to keep small children in a bubble and shield them from the less pleasant things in life. But most of us, we had to make that journey out into the more disappointing world at some stage. And to a greater or lesser extent, I think this is a universal story. Many of us have something we regret having lost, or something that perhaps broke way back then, that there's a small irrational part of us that thinks, well, it's not too late, you can replay a bit of the past, and this time it'll have a better conclusion. And that's kind of what this story is about.
Is it in any way a homage to English detective?
It's not so much an homage as the traditional English cozy detective story of the 1920s and 30s, the Agatha Christie, Dorothy S., that kind of detective story, is a taking off point. The main character seems to have fallen out of that kind of detective world. In other words, he believes that you can combat evil by finding some master criminal who is the source of it. That's a view that held to some extent in those genre detective things. That view of evil has probably fractured forever because of the experiences of the 20th century. That we know that bad things happen not just because of clever criminals, but because of chaos, war, nationalisms, racism's gone.
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah. I mean, we know where the really big scale bad things come from, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to have a man who tries to hold on to that traditional detective view of how to fight evil, unmask the murderer, and let's throw him into the 20th century as it moves from one world war to the next, and see how he copes.
You threw out the first 110 pages of your draft?
No, it wasn't the first 110 pages. I used to, but I did throw out 110 pages from the middle. I used to have a kind of a little miniature detective story within the larger story.
It didn't work.
Not for me. Partly because I think I'm not a genre detective writer, and it's much harder than people think. You have to be really good at that to write it. But also because I think it's very difficult to get two completely different kinds of characters on the same stage. It's hard to ask a reader at one and the same time to relate to certain characters as suspects in a kind of a mystery. And in that same book to relate to characters as though they were deeper people in a literary novel. And that was the real difficulty for me.
Do you learn something about yourself with every novel?
I try to. For me, to some extent, writing is that. To some extent, there is a self-indulgent core to my kind of writing, and I sometimes think it's just pure luck whether a writer like me is valued or not. It's pure coincidence if my deeper personal preoccupations happen to chime in with people at large.
Yeah.
That line between just self-indulgence and, you know, being a spokesperson for some kind of universal condition, I think is a very, very fine one.
Yeah. When you read reviews, do you learn anything about your work?
Yes, I take reviews very seriously, but I don't take any one review seriously. One of the fortunate things, if you're in my position as a writer, is that you get a broad range of reviews from right across the world.
You get a ton.
Yes.
I mean, everybody was on this book.
Yes. But the important thing is they come from different places, different writing communities, different circles of critics. I can't kid myself that, you know, a bunch of guys ganged up on me, you know, because I insulted somebody.
Because reviewers, like journalists, are incapable of an organized conspiracy.
Oh, well, there is that too. But because if people are saying that in Japan and, you know, the Midwest of America and France, you know, I can't believe they've all been conferring to gang up on me.
Yeah.
So a broad consensus emerges of how my book was read. And I do pay attention to that. You know, whether I change the way I write or respond to it is another matter, but I have to know broadly how my book was received by people who read it carefully. But I don't pay attention to any one review. You know, I don't get, you know, I mean, I think this is the advantage of having a whole range.
Do you remember most of the negative ones?
Not particularly. I remember this kind of overall kind of contour of kind of ups and downs of a, you know, of a, it's that overall shape of reviews. You know, it's that consensus that emerges. That's the important thing.
Christopher Banks.
Christopher Banks.
Him. Yes.
Well, what would you like to know about him? He's an odd guy. What's strange about him is that he.
How is he orphaned? Might be one question.
He thinks his parents have been kidnapped
right.
in Shanghai, and he thinks it's something to do with the opium trade.
Right.
Of course, that's not quite the way it works out. But the important thing about him is that he's a small child when this happens, but he's just about old enough to think he might have been able to do something about it. He's 10 years old, you know.
Yeah.
He's just at that awkward time, and so there's a part of him that thinks you know, he should have stopped it, and that it's his responsibility to put right the thing that went wrong. And so when he grows up, you know, that's what he tries to do. He becomes a detective, tries to solve the mystery. He tries to basically fix the world that fell apart when he was a small boy.
Sometimes it's difficult to know what's real and what he's imagining.
Yes, but that's because, I suppose it's because I've got less and less interested in writing about an unreliable or crazy narrator going through a more or less real world.
Yes.
I'm much more interested in actually, in a book, mapping out what the inside of someone's consciousness looks like. You know, so in this book, quite often the world outside bends to the strange logic in his head, the emotional logic. You know, it's not the case that people do double takes whenever he comes out with some strange notion. The whole world around him concurs with some of his very odd views of the world. And this is because, you know, I didn't want to write about a crazy, deluded fantasist. I wanted to pay some respect to that part of all of us, that is, from where, you know, kind of irrational, emotional motives come from. And I think, if we are honest, many of us actually, the big decisions in our lives are made not just from very sensible criteria. I mean, look, who we marry, what kind of jobs we do, what kind of friends. I mean,
or
often,
what? Finish your thought.
Yeah, I mean, all these things often derive from a less rational part of us. So we're trying to replay something, we're trying to redo something, we're trying to compensate for something from somewhere way back.
Have you ever, I mean, I used to envy those people that could take a legal pad like this and put down the pros and cons of stuff and then reach some rational decision, because it's most decisions you just, somehow you were led to them, I thought, you know, which may make me more, you know, intuitive than others. But there was more intuitive than it was being able to sort of, you know, pro and con it.
So, sometimes those pros and cons might be for real, but I often think we do that kind of thing as a kind of an alibi.
Which part of the thing?
The pros and cons.
Or are you looking to talk yourself out of it, or are you looking for some magic wand that's not going to be there?
I think it's a way of dignifying where we have landed. You know,
I
this
do
kind
too.
of the wind
Yeah, I agree
picks
with
us
that.
up and dumps
Yeah.
us somewhere, and we dignify where we've landed by saying, "I'm glad I did this.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm here in life.
Right.
I did it for this reason." But really, all these other things have picked you up and put you down there.
When somebody compares you to Kafka, you say what?
I'm not so fond of the Kafka comparison. I mean, that was done quite often because of my last book.
Right.
Whenever you veer away from straight, realistic writing, people get a little uneasy, and they immediately compare you to the one or two kind of giants who
right.
also write outside of straight realism. So they immediately names like Kafka, Beckett,
Right.
Nabokov come up, whether you are actually thematically or stylistically close to them or not.
Because just they have a limited frame of reference.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, it's not entirely unfair to do that, but I had a version of that early in my career when people used to compare me to Japanese writers, simply because they saw a Japanese name on the jacket, and I'd be compared to the 2 or 3 Japanese writers who are known in translation, regardless of any stylistic comparison points.
Who is Lorna and who is Naomi?
Oh, they're the 2 women in my life. I should say one is my wife, one is my daughter. So
Yeah.
it's not quite as exciting as it sounds.
Well, no, it's pretty good. Does Lorna is your wife and Naomi is your daughter? Or
That's right. Yes, they're my confidants and.
and first readers?
Well, Naomi's only 8, so she's a good reader of things like Harry Potter, but she's not quite up
Yes.
to. But
She likes Harry Potter?
Yes, she's read all the Harry Potter books 3 times.
Is that right?
Yeah, completely obsessed. Harry
Obsessed?
Potter. Yes, managed to wipe out Pokemon from her
Is that
consciousness,
right?
and that's quite an achievement.
Was that good or bad?
I'm fairly neutral about this. Some people are very alarmed that books are receding in the minds of young people. I haven't seen it. This Harry Potter craze has taken over, all my daughter's friends, not just her.
Everybody. It's evident in terms of the success.
Yeah, and it's taken me over, so I'm very, quite hooked on those books.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
I mean, that's the sort of magic of them. They appeal to both adults and children, right?
Yes. I haven't read the latest big one, but the first 3, I thought they were terrific.
Someone has described you as a poet of loss. Do you like that?
That has a nice ring about it. I think
Yeah,
that's
because
George.
that's displacement too, social displacement,
Yes.
loss.
Yes, I mean, yes.
That was George Carol Oates who
George
said that.
Carol Oates. I mean, I'm flattered to be praised by somebody of her
Who's
stature.
written as many books as she has. Well, yeah. What do you want readers to walk away from?
Readers to walk away from?
In other words, they read this book and they walk away. What do you hope they will have gotten out of it, other than, a moving story, which is at the heart of every novel?
Yes, of course I want them to be moved. I mean, if they're not moved, the whole thing doesn't even start.
That's right, you might as well be teaching.
Yes, exactly. I want them to be moved, but how do I want them to be moved? Well, I would like them to think about the role, for this book anyway, I'd like them to think about the role that I suppose our childhood plays in our adult lives,
Right.
and how sometimes a child's way of looking at the world sometimes remains frozen within us.
Is Freud helpful in this?
I'm not a big Freud reader. I work more intuitively. I look at myself, I look at my friends. I mean, I don't know whether I agree or not with Freud. I don't know enough about Freud to know that.
But if you were interested in the themes that you are, it would seem to me that you would clearly be interested, when you think about the themes you're interested in terms of psychiatry and psychological insight and what we know about the way we are,
Yes,
beyond observations of one's own life from the mirror.
I mean, you're quite right. I mean, this should be a territory I should be well steeped in.
Sure.
But as a novelist, I feel a certain instinctive defensiveness about immersing myself in whole bodies of work in that way. I think there is something about being a novelist. It's very important to maintain the fragility of your own world. And whether
Is your own world fragile?
I think so. I think any imaginary world that you're trying to create as a novelist is very fragile. I'm not, just writing up as a travel writer or a journalist or historian some world that I know really exists or existed out there. I'm conjuring up a world of my own, so it is a very fragile thing, and I instinctively fear research, whether it's hard data that I get by going to locations.
You fear it?
Yeah, I fear it, and
because it might somehow contaminate the purity of your intuitive insight?
Well, purity makes it sound too grand. It's because I'm trying to build.
I like grand.
I'm just being modest about it. You know, whether it's pure or not, I'm trying to build my world,
okay.
right? And it's, and sometimes going out, going to the real places can sometimes stop you building that world convincingly. And that's true with the ideas too. I don't want to expose myself too much to any theory or any doctrine. You know, I feel
a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yeah. I want to I have my own little territory as a novelist, and I defend it a little from other disciplines, you know, other chunks of research, other scholarly thought.
There's some. I mean, I have considerable admiration for choosing, in a sense, the area that wanting to stay within the area that you find most compelling, and that speaks to you the most and resonates within you the most, and continuing to dig deep into that place.
Well, I think, you know, if you're a certain kind of novelist, that's what you're trying to do. You, in the end, I mean, we talked about reviews and acclaim, but in the end, there is also a very lonely set of terms about success and failure. In the end, you do assess success and failure in very lonely terms that often has nothing to do with reviews or whatever. You know that you're after something, and you kind of know to what extent you've succeeded in doing it, succeeded in finding these things. And sometimes that doesn't have very much to do with, you know, whether a book gets praised or gets great reviews. And so there is this kind of almost parallel career you run as a writer, a lonelier one. Yes, you dig around in this particular area, you know, you want to find something, and you just hope that from the point of view of keeping an audience, making a living, that this continues to interest other people. But in the end, it's yes, you judge success and failure in very lonely terms at the end.
When we were orphans. Thank you.
Thank you.